My father-in-law was mid-sentence when I interrupted him. He'd been toasting something about 22 years of marriage, about what a lucky man he was to have raised a daughter like Irene. I put my hand flat on the table and said, very clearly, before we get to that part, I think there's something everyone here should know. The table had 12 people at it. My mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, and his wife. 3 couples who'd been my in-laws' friends since before Irene was born. And Irene herself, sitting across from me, her wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. What's happening? My mother-in-law asked. I'm ending the marriage, I said. And since we're all here anyway, I thought I'd explain why. The silence that followed was the kind you only get when 12 people simultaneously decide to stop breathing. My father-in-law set down his fork. Irene's sister Fiona, sitting 2 seats to my left, went very still in the way people go still when they realize they've been caught in a perimeter they thought was safe. Irene found her voice first. This is not the time or the place. You're probably right, I said. But you had 8 months of times and places, and you didn't use any of them to tell me the truth. So here we are. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a 46-year-old structural engineer from Charlotte, North Carolina, became the kind of man who dismantles his marriage at a birthday dinner for his father-in-law. Irene and I had been married for 14 years. We met at a mutual friend's wedding in Savannah. She was laughing at something the best man had said, and I remember thinking, that's the laugh I want to hear for the rest of my life. We were married 18 months later, bought a house in the South End, settled into the kind of life that looks exactly like what you'd drawn on paper when you were 28 and optimistic about everything. She ran her own interior design firm out of our spare bedroom for the first 4 years, then moved into a shared studio downtown when the client list grew enough to justify it. I managed structural projects for a mid-sized engineering firm. We argued about small things and forgot the arguments by morning. Not a perfect marriage, but a real one, the kind where you know the other person's habits so well that you don't have to think about them, and that familiarity feels like safety. Then Roman came back to Charlotte. I didn't know who Roman was when Irene first mentioned him that October. An old college friend, she said. We lost touch after graduation. He just relocated from Raleigh for a project at a firm downtown. I ran into him at a design conference last week. Small world, right? A small world. By November, Roman had become a recurring feature of our dinner conversations. Roman had good instincts about commercial spaces. Roman thought Irene should submit her hotel renovation work for a regional design award. Roman had recommended a new Vietnamese place on Central Avenue that was apparently life-changing. Sounds like Roman has opinions about everything, I said one evening, not looking up from my laptop. He's just enthusiastic, Irene said. It's nice to have someone in the industry who actually understands the work. I let it slide. Jealousy over a friend you haven't met seems like a small, ungenerous thing, and I've never been the kind of man who monitors his wife's friendships. Maybe that was a mistake, or maybe it was just decency. I've turned it over enough times by now that I've stopped trying to decide. The first thing that actually caught my attention was a credit card statement in December. Irene had always managed our joint finances. She was more organized than I was, and I'd never questioned the arrangement. But I was looking for an order confirmation and pulled up the account on my laptop. Dinner at Ardmore, $224. I didn't recognize the name. Stonecroft Spa, $380. I didn't know Irene went to spas. We'd joked for years that she was immune to relaxation. Overnight at the Dunmore Inn, $310. That one I definitely would have remembered discussing. What's the Dunmore Inn? I asked her that night, setting my laptop on the coffee table. She didn't miss a beat. Girls' weekend. Fiona and I went in late November. I mentioned it. You were buried in the Hargrove project deadline. You probably don't remember. She was right that I'd been buried. That's how it works. The lies settle inside the spaces where you're distracted. And they look just like the truth until you're paying attention from the right angle. I believed her. I closed the laptop and went to bed. But I started paying attention. The thing about suspicion is that once it wakes up, it doesn't go back to sleep. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I'd been filtering out. Irene's phone always went face down on the counter now, screen to the tile, every single time she set it down. She showered immediately after getting home from late client meetings, before she'd even taken off her shoes. And there was a pause. Small, not dramatic, just a half second longer than it should be, before she answered simple questions. When will you be back? Who else is going? That pause happens when someone is deciding which version to give you. I checked our phone plan records. We'd been on a family account for years, so I could see the outgoing call and text logs. One number appeared constantly in Irene's activity, sometimes 40 or 50 contacts in a single day, distributed through the morning, afternoon, and late evening like a second heartbeat running alongside ours. The number wasn't saved in her phone under any name, which meant she'd been careful enough to keep it out of her contacts. A reverse lookup took about 4 minutes. The number was registered to Roman Delacroix, 42, last known address Raleigh, North Carolina. I sat in my car in the parking structure under my office building for a long time after that, staring at the name on my phone screen. Roman Delacroix, the enthusiastic college friend. I didn't confront her. I'm an engineer. I don't build on a foundation until I understand what's underneath it. So I kept going. The real confirmation came from our shared iPad. Irene and I had bought it for a vacation 3 years earlier and still used it occasionally around the house. I picked it up one morning to check the weather, and the browser was still open to a page she'd been looking at the night before. A reservation confirmation from the Crestwood Lodge in Asheville. 2 guests. Check in the following Friday. I screenshotted it before I put the tablet down. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. I think I'd already known for a while by that point, and the confirmation just clarified things. Set them in place. 3 days later, Irene mentioned the trip. I'm thinking about doing a solo inspiration weekend in Asheville, she said over dinner. Walk the Arts District. Look at some architectural details for a project I'm pitching. Solo. How long? I asked. Just Friday to Sunday, back before dinner Sunday. Sounds good, I said. You could use a break. She looked at me for a second, checking something. Then she smiled and said thanks, and I went back to my food. I also found the photographs that week, which was almost accidental. Irene used a cloud backup service that synced across our home network, and I logged into the admin panel to troubleshoot a storage issue. Her backup folder was sitting there. I don't know what exactly made me open it. Instinct, maybe. Or just the momentum of what I'd already found. She'd named the subfolder Design Refs. It was not design references. It was 6 months of photographs, Irene and Roman at restaurants at what looked like a park along a river, at the Stonecroft Spa that had shown up on our credit card statement in December. In some of the pictures, she was laughing the way she used to laugh when we were first together. That particular kind of unreserved laughing that happens when you're not performing for anyone. That was the part that hit hardest, not the fact of it, the laughing. I copied everything to an external drive, closed the folder, and started making plans. My father-in-law Bernard turned 70 that March. He is, by any measure, a good man. 30 years in commercial real estate, youth basketball coach on weekends for longer than that, the kind of person who means it when he shakes your hand. He had no idea what his daughter had been doing. I was certain of that. What I was also certain of was that he deserved to know. The birthday dinner was Fiona's idea, a private room at Castellanos, a nice Italian place near their parents' house, family plus a handful of longtime friends. About 20 people eventually. I'd been invited as Irene's husband. I arrived as something else. The Fiona piece was what made my mind up about the timing. I'd kept digging after Irene came back from Asheville, and I'd discovered that this wasn't a 2-person secret. About 3 weeks before Roman first reappeared at that design conference, Fiona had driven to Raleigh for a weekend. I found a dry cleaning receipt in a jacket she'd left at our house. Dinner for 3 at a restaurant in Raleigh. Fiona had been the bridge. She'd engineered the reunion deliberately and then spent 8 months providing cover. The Dunmore Inn Girls weekend. Likely the spa visit, too. She'd been in the architecture of this from the beginning. So yes, I wanted Fiona in the room. When I said what I said at the table, Bernard set down his fork with the careful precision of a man who is deciding not to break something. What proof, he asked, flat measured, which was worse than anger. I slid my phone to him. The hotel confirmation with 2 guest names, the photo of Irene and Roman at the river park, her leaning into him, the phone log showing their contact pattern across 8 months, a column of timestamps dense enough to tile a floor. Bernard looked at each one. Then he looked at Irene. She'd been trying to catch my eye since I started talking, sending some signal that this could still be managed, contained, redirected. I wasn't looking at her. I was watching her father work through it. Who is this man? Bernard asked. Irene's mouth opened and closed. His name is Roman Delacroix, I said. They've known each other since college. Apparently they had a relationship for several years before Irene and I met. She didn't mention that detail when he reappeared in October. He's a friend, Irene said, and even she seemed to hear how hollow it was coming out. He checked into that lodge with you, I said. I called the front desk while you were gone. The reservation was under his name. They confirmed 2 guests. Fiona pushed her chair back an inch, as if the small distance might help. Fiona. Bernard didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Did you know about this? The pause before her answer was the answer. It's more complicated than... You drove to Raleigh in September, I said. Dinner for 3, you introduced them. You made the connection happen, and then spent 8 months telling Irene you were at the spa with her, or at the inn with her, every time she needed cover. Fiona looked at the table. Is that true? Bernard asked her. She didn't say no. My mother-in-law put her hands over her face. Around the table, the longtime friends were finding quiet ways to redirect their attention, looking at menus, studying their wine glasses, giving the family the only courtesy they could offer. Bernard asked everyone else to give us a few minutes. And they did, with the tactful speed of people who understood what they'd just witnessed. What followed is between that family and those walls. I'll say only that Bernard said very little and asked very precise questions, that my mother-in-law cried steadily and quietly, and that Irene at some point stopped trying to reframe things and simply went silent. I left after half an hour. It wasn't my scene to direct. I'd said what I'd come to say. Roman Delacroix was married. His wife's name was Anita, a physical therapist at a sports medicine clinic in Raleigh, early 40s, 2 boys aged 9 and 11. Her Facebook profile showed a woman with a practical, warm face and approximately no idea that her husband had been conducting a sustained affair for the better part of a year. She posted photos of the boys' soccer games and the occasional hiking trip and birthday cake she'd made from scratch. I thought about what it would feel like to be her on a Tuesday morning, eating lunch near her clinic, still not knowing. I drove to Raleigh on a Thursday, called in a personal day, found her at a sandwich place 2 blocks from the clinic, where she apparently ate lunch several days a week. I recognized her from her profile. I approached her table and said, "Excuse me, are you Anita Delacroix?" "My name, I'm Irene's husband. I think we need to have a conversation about our spouses." She looked at me the way you look at someone who's just said something your brain is refusing to process. Then something shifted, a kind of recognition, or maybe a settling, the way a person looks when they've been braced for news that finally arrives. "Sit down," she said. I put the folder between us. Hotel receipts, phone logs, photographs from the cloud backup. The Crestwood Lodge confirmation with both their names. I'd organized it the way I'd organize a project assessment. Clear, sequential, labeled. She went through every page without speaking. When she got to the photographs, she stopped on one for a long time. Irene and Roman at the river park, laughing, his hand at her back. Then she closed the folder with both hands, gently, like it was something that might shatter. "How long?" she asked. 8 months that I can document. Possibly longer. She was quiet. Then, he told me he was working late 3 Fridays in a row last fall. I made dinner and left it in the fridge. I didn't say anything. "I need a few days," she said finally. "Of course. Take whatever time you need." She looked at me directly. "Why did you come here yourself?" "Because I would have wanted to know," I said. "And because you seemed like someone who deserved the truth rather than finding out some other way, later, from someone who had less respect for you than they should." She held my gaze for a moment, then she said quietly, "So did you." I drove back to Charlotte in the afternoon. I felt tired in the specific way you feel after doing something that was necessary and cost something real to do. Anita was methodical in a way I recognized and respected. She didn't post anything online. She didn't make a dramatic scene. She simply, over the following 2 weeks, made sure the people who had a right to know about Roman's choices knew about them. She sent documentation to Roman's business partner, a man named Graham who co-owned the architecture firm and had been publicly vouching for Roman's character and reliability for years. She sent a letter to Roman's parents in South Carolina. She informed the principal at their son's school that Roman would be reducing his involvement with the parent advisory board for personal reasons, with enough supplementary information that the principal understood exactly what those reasons were. None of it was hysterical. None of it was retaliatory in any way that could be called unfair. She just told the truth to people who'd been operating on a false version of it. I got most of this from Carl, who had been a mutual friend of mine and Irene's for about a decade. One of those people who appears at every milestone without being anyone's closest confidant. Steady and present and observant. He was loosely connected to Charlotte's design community and knew people who knew Roman's colleagues. Graham apparently took it personally. Carl told me over coffee a few weeks later. He felt like he'd been made to look foolish. He restructured the partnership agreement. Roman's still at the firm, but he's been functionally demoted, reporting to people who used to report to him. And Irene? Carl looked at me carefully. She lost the Mercer Hotel project, the pitch she'd been working on for 4 months. Turns out one of the Mercer partners is Graham's brother-in-law. He paused. Nobody orchestrated it. It just went that way. I nodded. She's staying at Fiona's place for now, Carl continued. Her parents won't have her at the house. Bernard apparently told her she's welcome when she decides to stop explaining and start being honest about what she did. I sat with that for a moment. It didn't give me satisfaction exactly. It just felt like the correct weight of things settling to the correct level. Roman came to see me about 3 weeks after the birthday dinner. I was finishing quarterly reports at my desk when security called up to say there was someone in the lobby. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in a month, which I imagine was accurate. I brought him to the conference room and left the door open. You went to Anita, he said. I did. She's filing for divorce. Full custody primary residence. Graham restructured my role at the firm. He looked at his hands on the table. You took everything. I told the truth, I said. Your choices did the rest. I came here because I thought maybe there was some conversation we could have. There isn't. He leaned back in the chair. My son, my 9-year-old. He asked Anita if Dad was coming home and she didn't know what to say. He's been blaming himself. I'm sorry about your son, I said. Genuinely, he didn't choose any of this. Neither did Anita. No, I said, she didn't. That's why she deserved to know what you were doing. Roman was quiet for a while. When he spoke again, the negotiating quality was gone from his voice. I told Irene I was going to leave Anita. I meant it when I said it. I thought I meant it. And then things fell apart. Everything fell apart at once, and I panicked and I ended it with Irene. She called me from Fiona's driveway right after your dinner, and I just couldn't do it. He shook his head. So I ended up with nothing. Roman. I stood up. For whatever it's worth, I genuinely hope you figure out how to be present for your boys. They didn't make your decisions for you, and they shouldn't have to carry the weight of them. He nodded, staring at the table. As for everything else, you need to sit in it for a while. That's not cruelty. That's just how consequences work when the things you built were built on lies. I walked him to the elevator and went back to my desk. The divorce took 4 months. North Carolina law treats documented adultery as relevant to the proceedings, and my attorney, a thorough, unhurried woman who asked exactly the right questions and never seemed rattled by anything, presented the evidence in organized binders that made the opposing side's position feel like it was arguing uphill from the beginning. Irene's attorney recommended settling early. The terms were fair in the way that fair usually means. I kept the house and the accounts we'd built together. She kept her business assets and her car. No spousal support, given the circumstances. I signed the final papers on a Tuesday afternoon in late June, drove home, sat in the kitchen and ate a sandwich and listened to the house. It wasn't empty, it was just quiet. That distinction turned out to matter more than I expected. 7 months later, Carl called on a Sunday afternoon while I was refinishing the back deck. Something I'd been putting off for 3 years because I'd always assumed it was a 2-person job. I discovered over the summer that it was a perfectly manageable 1-person job. It just takes a little longer. Heard something through the usual channels, Carl said. Irene's moved out of Fiona's place. Got an apartment near the university. Bernard's been quietly helping her settle in. He's still angry, but he's not the kind of man to let his daughter be completely adrift. Good, I said. He shouldn't have to choose between being a principled person and being her father. She asks about you sometimes, Carl said. Through people we both know. What does she want to know? Whether you seem okay, whether you're angry, whether you ever mention her. I thought about it. And what do people tell her? That you seem fine. That your name doesn't really come up in relation to her anymore. I set down the brush. That's accurate. Yeah, Carl said. I imagine that's the answer that costs her the most. Maybe. I don't spend much time thinking about it. The deck needed a second coat, the afternoon light was good, and I had nowhere I needed to be. That's a kind of freedom I hadn't expected to find on the other side of all this. Not triumph, not relief exactly, just a quiet that fills in the space where the lies used to live, slowly, the way light fills a room when someone finally opens the blinds. You notice it one morning and realize it's been there for a while already. You've just been living in it without naming it. That's enough. It's more than enough.